Okay, first things first, we're gonna get a little bit of an overview here.
So really, when you think about sharks, they are the indicator species, the sentinel species, and if they struggle, we will not have a healthy, robust planet. OCEARCH is a data-centric organization. It's an enterprise we built to help scientists collect previously unobtainable data in the ocean to help move the system toward abundance. What we're simply trying to do is learn what's never been learned before at a rate that's never been achieved. And the only way to do that is to enable big collaborative teams. That's why we have many different scientists from many different institutions, all with different disciplines, maximizing the leap forward in knowledge on every single animal we touch, and integrated into a STEM educational curriculum. And then in the long term, the children are being educated in a data-driven, centrist way to be the practical planet and resource guardians of the future. It's about total inclusion at every level. Exploration in the now, science in the now, education in the now.
Okay, students, why are we talking about sharks? Why are we talking about a nonprofit? Because every aspect of the entrepreneurial mindset we have talked about is interwoven into this story. We are going to hear today and be joined by the founder of that organization, who is an entrepreneur disguised as a fisherman and a nonprofit leader. Please help me welcome first time to Ann Arbor, Chris Fischer. Good to see you. Thanks for coming out.
Happy to be here. Thanks you all for coming out. Yeah.
Okay.
It's beautiful. My first time in the legendary Ann Arbor on the Michigan campus. It's been a thrill.
First of many, hopefully, to come.
That'd be great.
That's right. We got a couple lakes around here.
Yeah, we'll have to go stick a fish at a break here.
Yeah. Okay, so this is cool. This is great. OCEARCH is amazing, the work that you've done and the shark video and the research, but that's a long way down the road. That wasn't where everything began. Take us back through this journey story. Unpack for them the origins of where your entrepreneurial mindset kind of started off.
Well, my mindset definitely started off in the household. My father was a serial entrepreneur. We had started a family business together when I was 12 years old out of our garage. And so he had been through multiple layers of entrepreneurship at a small level. So always growing up in an environment, a lot of dinner table conversations about business. You know, anything's possible, Chris, if you just take off 1 inch at a time. An inch is a cinch, a yard is hard. All these little sayings. He was the king of the saying that was kind of a failure to plan is a plan to fail. You know, those sorts of entrepreneurial lessons at the dinner table. My mom, who's still with us, she's 91. We delivered Meals on Wheels together when I was a kid growing up. And so we would go out and take food to people who couldn't get out. And at the time, I didn't really understand it. And later, it really came to hit me that during that process, I had really learned to understand the joy of serving and this sort of like fulfillment that you get by helping people and other things. So I was spun up in this discussion at the table that was around entrepreneurship and around service. And the one thing I learned at a very young age was that regardless of what you achieve and more of the kind of entrepreneurial side, this service side provides some sort of feeling of fulfillment and joy that is completely different than the feeling of success in a business. And I think that is immensely powerful for us as people when we reflect back on our journeys, because you meet the people all the time that have had the wildly successful entrepreneurial journey but somehow still feel hollow.
Yeah.
You know, or they reach a number and then they reach the number and then they're like totally disappointed because that was a goal, and then they're there and then they're like, but I don't feel the way I thought I was gonna feel. And I think that for me, those sorts of feelings of fulfillment and happiness that are separate from like success came from learning the joy of serving with my mom.
Okay, so the joy of serving, the understanding of kind of opportunity maybe from your dad. Students, you're going to hear a theme throughout a lot of this, and you've heard it from a lot of our other speakers, and that's the notion that anyone who's got an entrepreneurial mindset kind of has an exploration mindset. They have a willingness to go out there and seek and scratch at curiosity and kind of explore what's going on and observe what's around them. You had a situation where your parents took you on a road trip to Alaska that was pretty epic as a child and allowed you to have a grand sense of kind of exploration that was fed. And then that carried forward, it sounds like, into kind of your college years. Unpack for them what that was.
Yeah, so in my early years, my parents, this would have been around 1980, late 70s, early 80s, was amazing. They picked me up on a 30-foot motorhome in Louisville, Kentucky, where I grew up, graduate of Indiana University down in Bloomington, went to school there in their business school. But we left the day after fourth grade ended and got back the day before fifth grade started. And we drove from Louisville to Alaska and back to meet my brothers who were up there working at the salmon factories, making money for their college spending money. So they would shoot up there and work all summer, save up a bunch of money, and then come back. And at that time, my two older brothers were at Vanderbilt. And so we drove up to see them because I'm the youngest of five. So they're 12 and 11 years older than me. And that changed my life. Number one, I was the kid growing up in Kentucky who was running around in the woods every day after school chasing fish and frogs. So I was outside on the water all the time. That particular trip, my parents set up for me to be able to fish the whole way. So I was meeting all these different people from different cultures. And man, I'm 10 years old. 12 years old, whatever, 10, 12, and fishing with them. And really it opened up my mind because, back in 1980 or so, the world was much smaller than it is today. So it really allowed me to see, wow, there's so much going on out here beside where I'm growing up in Kentucky. It led to an appreciation from that. It led to an understanding that everywhere you go, there's something to learn from those people because they've learned differently and they have things. And it just opened up my mind to this fact that you don't need to be afraid of what's around the next corner. It's actually really exciting to explore and always want to go down the next street and see what's around there, down the next creek or and you don't know what's going to happen. Oftentimes nothing happens, but sometimes the most amazing things happen. And I think in the journey of an entrepreneur, you got to get used to and feel comfortable in an environment where you may not know what's going to happen.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. So you go to college at IU. It's okay, it's not Ohio State, so you're welcome here. It's not a problem. You go over there, you study business, and then when you get out of there, you start working a little bit in the family business that your folks had. And you decide to really take on the Asian market and really expand that worldview.
Yeah, so I studied international entrepreneurship at IU's business school with a focus in Asia. So I went to school over at the National University of Singapore as well. At that time, our small family business had began to emerge. We developed this, in the beginning, it was massive ice dispensing equipment for military bases that you'd put in a truck and distribute ice. And that was the old way. We acquired this bankrupt company in a garage, and my father was busy serving. He was doing some give back work in his career, and he said, boys, see what you can do with this. And we kept shrinking down those machines until we developed the first hotel ice dispenser. So when you go into a hotel today and you press a button or hit the chute and it drops into your ice, we developed those very first ones because before you all came around, believe it or not, back in the day, you would just flip open the ice bin and you would scoop it out and like animals could crawl in there, anything could happen. It wasn't sanitary. That was a breakthrough for that segment, but then they wanted them smaller and smaller, and the next thing we knew, we had developed the first self-serve soda machine. So every time you make a big gulp and you get ice in the middle and a soda on the side, we developed those very first machines back in the mid-'80s just by following one of the core rules that led to the success of OCEARCH, which was, my father always talked about, like if you're interested in a space, you're not going to be able to enter exactly how you want. It's not going to be your vision for what the ending looks like, but if you can get into the space, you can be observant around the market, survive in some way with your core business, that market will show you opportunities on how to evolve your business. So we got in that business, giant machines, and ended up, the problem was they needed the smallest machine they could put on a counter. And we ended up, riding that.
Sure.
And Asia was erupting. Coke and Pepsi needed the machines. I immediately started commuting to Asia and exploding that business when Asia was erupting across the 90s.
Not being afraid of the unknown around the corner, not being in a position to
Well,
where
I do
you were
remember,
going over there.
you all will have these moments in your life. Will you remember moments? Like, I remember when I got sent to California from Kentucky, and I remember being on that plane, getting ready to land in Riverside, California, and I should have flown into Orange County, but I didn't know Southern California, and just being like, wow, like when I land here and when I head off, I don't know anybody. I know a few customers. I don't know what's going to happen.
But it didn't
And there's
stop
fear, but you got to learn how to find like excitement in that fear.
Right, absolutely. Because part of that excitement then also creates opportunities to lead to your passion.
Yeah, well, that led to Asia. Asia exploded, and then in late 1997, my older brothers decided to sell the business.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, I thought I was going to work there my whole life. I was 29 years old, and it wasn't like a liquidity event that was just like you can retire. It was enough to be like, what do you want to invest in to try to create your next thing? And so I began reflecting on my passion and what did I want to do with my life. And for me to try to think about that, this was so interesting. In the beginning, for me to try to find where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do in the business space, I found myself getting out on the water because that's where I found the peace and the clarity to think and see forward. And then while I was out there, this was my passion and my profession, and I started to think about like, why am I coming here to think about going somewhere else? What I need to think about is making something right here where I want to be. And that is where my passion and my profession began to collide. And I decided I was going to start a fishing show on TV so that I could fish and travel the world and kind of pursue my passion and then build a business around it. So I started a fishing show on ESPN around 2000. It was called Offshore Adventures. This is before the internet, so it's when all the fishing and hunting shows were only on Saturday and Sunday morning on ESPN2.
Just before we get down that far, if anybody else is wondering like I am, like what gives you the business to start a fishing show out of nowhere on ESPN? How do you make that pitch?
Well, the first thing I did to get in the space is there was a tournament series that they were making a TV show out of, and they needed teams. So I was like, in order to learn about the space, I'm just going to enter a team in this, and I'm going to see how they make a fishing show and participate in it. And then I went and did that for a year, and I was like, oh man, what we do on the water is way cooler than this. If they're going to watch this, they're going to love what we're going to do. So then I just found out the way to do it was, back then you could actually go to ESPN, and if they liked your concept, you could actually buy the time. And then you get the commercial inventory, and you have to sell that to corporate sponsors to try to recover your costs. So I took the leap. It was a $200,000 time buy, and I, didn't know what was going to happen. But I started pitching companies what we were going to do, and I was able to close Red Lobster because we had an eating segment. We were one of the first shows that actually did what you perceive as now as catch and cook, where we would catch one fish, show people how to handle it, and we did the gourmet galley. And I was able to go sell that to Red Lobster for $1 million a year, and that's what got us off the ground.
Okay. Amazing, for one. And students, again, the common thread here, curious, exploration, scratch, opportunity. How can I monetize? How can I get backing of this? Same thing applies for everything that you're thinking about doing with trying to launch a business. Awesome, you get the show, you got Red Lobster on board, show's going pretty well. How does this take to a point where otherwise it becomes a calling for you?
So the passion part was there in the fishing show because, I was doing what I loved, but I found myself over time, we made 188 offshore adventures. So no, when you start to get into 150 and you're making these and you have this service component in your life, I kind of started to have this feeling like this is really cool. Everyone who's watching thinks it's really cool, but I started to develop that empty feeling I was talking a little bit about, like this is great, but I feel like we should be able to do so much more. And I had a stewardship message in the show since the beginning, which was very unusual in the late 90s and early 2000s, where I ended the show, get out and discover the world offshore and be a responsible steward of the sea. So I started talking about stewardship. I joined the board of the Bill Fish Foundation so that I could learn how science was happening with the animals we were catching and releasing a lot of. And I started to learn about science in the fishing space. And when I started to learn about science, I started to see that, our approach to ocean research is hugely inefficient. It's not delivering us the data sets we need to manage the future toward abundance. And I started to see all these opportunities when I started to help the scientists, because the scientists were trying to go out on the water and work on the water to collect their data to publish their papers. But in reality, they had no boats, no money, and didn't know how to catch. We had a boat, we had enough money to go, and we knew how to catch. And so we started exploding the rate of learning of all the scientists we helped. So if we were in the Sea of Cortez off Baja, I would take the sailfish scientist. And they might have been trying to tag 20 sailfish for 2 years, and they had 5. And we'd tag them the last 15 in a week. And so we could see that we were exploding the rate of data collection. And if you talk to anyone in the ocean space, the single biggest challenge we have in managing the ocean is data deficit. So I started to see, by bringing people together, we could increase the speed at which we overcame data deficit.
What year is this? Where are we at in timeline?
This is around 2004, 2003.
2004, 2003.
This is offshore adventures, beginning to engage in science.
Okay. So leveraging an opportunity that you had previously built.
The boat's paid for by the show. It doesn't cost me any more money to throw a scientist in a bunk, and we can radically affect his opportunity to publish and then affect policy.
And you see the opportunity to really make a bigger impact by having this disruptive collaboration of the existing model of kind of what happened.
Yeah, because at the time, and still to this day in many places, those people start to get siloed into groups and other things. The scientists don't trust the fishermen don't trust the scientists. One thinks they're smarter than the other. In reality, they're both geniuses in 2 different arenas. One is like how to live on the ocean for 2 weeks and catch giant things and let them go alive. They got a PhD in fishing. There's not a lot of guys who can do that, right? And then, of course, you have your PhDs, your researchers who can take a data set and publish it, but they weren't working together, and therefore we didn't have the most difficult questions answered, which were the fundamental data sets toward building toward abundance. So I just started to explore the area and start trying to connect dots and pull them together on a common vision. One of the things I think when you lead is about trying to create a common vision, and if you can really pull off the right common vision, you can get people to operate toward that objective with a selfless disposition. And that is very important in any organization. Because if you can't get somewhat of the selfless disposition moving across, what that means is I'm going to do whatever it takes to achieve this vision. I don't need to be the man, or I don't need to be the woman, right? We just need to accomplish this for our grandkids. When you can start to get that sort of energy flowing, you begin to do a lot of things that people once thought were impossible. And I can just briefly, I can remember, some of the early conversations with people that didn't want to collaborate. I would have to try to find these really basic core common goals they might have. So when I had scientists and fishermen arguing, I would just be like, guys, how many of you all want your great-grandkid to be able to eat a fish sandwich? Well, everybody raises their hand. So it's like, okay, so for the purpose of this conversation, there's no me and you, there's just us. And what are we going to do about it? And I think those sorts of big picture perspectives are important in an entrepreneurial journey if you start to have individual agendas pop up across the organization, because you can get rid of the individual agenda and get on the common agenda.
And you've made a comment before that I think is so important for y'all to hear when you're thinking about the context of social problems that you perceive and things that you otherwise want to fix in the world. And that is about the distinction between fixing bad and broken systems versus treating the noise of bad actors.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it was very easy in the early days, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of these things where when people weren't on the common vision, you could get upset with the individual. and feel like maybe it was their personal disposition. But when you really stepped back and looked at it, they were forced to operate in a bad system.
Break that down from
And
what
the
does that mean?
system shaped their behavior.
For
For
OCEARCH.
example, in the ocean research space, outside of OCEARCH for the most part, you're going to find all the scientists siloed out as individuals trying to collect some data and hoard that and prevent anyone else from seeing it because they're trying to leverage it to publish a paper to get the next grant and beat their peer in that race, which is commonly referred to as publish or perish. And so publish or perish itself is the reason why we don't have the data sets we need in the ocean, because it forces individuals into silos competing against their peers. So for example, in the white shark space, when we captured the first 4,000-pound white shark and lifted it out of the water, people said it was impossible to handle these animals and let them go alive. And we did that, and we applied the latest technology, and we did one thing. It was a tremendous breakthrough. And I looked down at the scientists after that. I said, I thought data deficit was our challenge here. We need like 25 more smart people here doing different things to maximize the data set coming off this animal. And he said, no, we can't do that. I'm trying to get ahead of all those people and publish so I can win the grant game. He wasn't a bad person who wanted to undermine the future of the ocean. He was just trying to survive. And so, we had a different philosophy and we paid for it and it was our ship. So we knew at that moment we had to build these massive collaborative teams to maximize the data off every animal we touch. But what was interesting about that is our disposition as watermen, as professional watermen, was that, yeah, we'll do that because that's the right thing to do from a data collection standpoint. But the real emotional reason that the crew was demanding that was because if we're going to catch this massive animal and we're going to take it through this process, in order to honor this beast, we have to collect the maximum amount of data we can from it so that we can let it go and solve the puzzle touching the fewest amount of animals. So their motivation was, if I'm going to put this animal through it, your obligation, and I'm going to catch and deliver this to you, and pay for it. Your community's obligation is to develop as much data from that individual animal as possible so that we can answer all these questions to manage them back, touching the fewest amount of animals. That's ocean first. That's shark first. That's great-grandchildren first. And it also happens to be the most efficient path, the critical path to abundance.
To this point of critical path to abundance, again, as you're approaching a societal ill, as you're approaching a social problem you want to fix, like Chris did, you decided to focus in on sharks. Why sharks? Why does that matter? Why is that the key to unlocking abundance? In the same way, why is there a situation where you have to identify the most valuable aspect of the problem to touch and to move in order to fix it?
So we did, the answer is, quite frankly, when we started Offshore Adventures, we didn't know that. Like, we were going around catching 1,000-pound marlin and giant tuna and making TV shows about it. And quite frankly, the only people who shark fish were the people who didn't know how to fish. And so when we started helping all these marlin people and sail fishing people, one of those scientists happened to also be a white shark scientist. And a paper was published in 2006 that said we were down to 9% of our large sharks worldwide. And we were seeing whole ecosystems collapse when we lost the sharks because the other elements of the food web would explode, modify the behavior of everything, and the system would collapse. And you'd end up with a fraction of the fish you should have. And they presented this paper to me in 2006 with this marlin scientist. We were in Panama putting out tags for him. And he said, hey, man, if we don't fix this giant shark problem, there's not going to be any marlin. And I was first like, how does that work? You know what? And he said, when you're in places like we're in here and places like our East Coast, especially where it's warmer, every night when all the squid migrate to the surface of the ocean, if the sharks aren't there, they eat all our baby fish, they eat all our fry, all the baby tuna, all the baby mahi, all the baby everything. The sharks are supposed to be there to keep those squid down a bit every night when they migrate up. And so the squid end up wiping out all our fry, and there's no fish to grow up for us. And in the northern latitudes where there's things like seals, we know that one white shark moving up and down the beach can keep 1,000 seals pinned on the beach. And they'll stay there till they're almost starving, get in for a few minutes, get some food, and get out. We know if that white shark's not there, every single one of those seals eats 4 times more per day. And they wipe out all the bait, all the stripers, all the cod, all the lobsters, and there's no food for us. So it was a real big pivot to be like, oh my God, I never realized these sharks are the guardians of our fish stocks. And we're down to 9% of our guards. And we're losing our stocks because of it. And I just said, wow, I didn't know that. And well, who's working on the big shark thing? He said, nobody, they're too big. We've never been able to leverage the latest technology to learn how to manage them back from this 9%. We don't know where they mate. We don't know where they give birth. We don't know what they eat. We don't know where they go. We can't affect their future, which means we can't affect the future abundance of the system.
Right.
And to me, that you got to remember, you get in a space. Remember, I started a fishing show, but the core reason I got in the space, my hero was Cousteau. I was more interested in creating the biggest explorer brand in the space that could be centrist to bring people into centrist conversations and minimize the fringes of the conversation, whether it was an environmentalist or a poacher, because the answer is always in the middle, and the conversations were being dominated by the fringes since Cousteau passed. So like my original noble goal, even when I started the fishing show, was to pour the world's oceans into people's lives at a scale unseen since Cousteau. I benchmarked, he led 22 expeditions. He had about 1 billion impressions a year. I benchmarked, even with the fishing show. So when the shark thing came up, and I talked to my right-hand man, Brett McBride. He's the most gifted waterman I know. I said, do you think we can get a shark in this lift on the side we use to pick up boats and give these scientists some safe access and let it go alive? Like, look, it's easy to catch giant things and kill them. It's very difficult to capture them, handle them, and let them go alive. That's an entirely different task. And he said he thought we could do it. And at that time, I saw this path. I've always been, so I got to tell you something. If I could see it, I could make it happen. And I think you need to spend time on these entrepreneurial journeys, really trying to visualize the path, visualize where you're trying to go. And at that moment, I remember talking to my sister, and I was like, maybe this is the opportunity to pivot from fisherman to explorer. Maybe this is the opportunity to have a global impact and become a servant of the future of the ocean and instill this fulfillment that came to me from serving. And that was the first time where I saw a glimmer through a very complicated maze of maybe becoming the ocean explorers of our time, of maybe making a global impact on abundance. And I can tell you, when you have that moment and you see that glimmer of light, as dim as it might be, through as complex a maze as it can be, for me, the experience was something happened to me that at that moment, I knew I couldn't walk away from that because I couldn't pull my last breath remembering that glimmer of maybe making a global impact and not committing every bit of mental, emotional, and financial capacity I had to pulling it off, even if I failed.
It's students, think back to Inder Singh when he's talking to you about the notion of 3 reasons to start a company, one of those being that you cannot sleep at night because of the problem that you want to solve. Same theme here. Global impact you want to make. Unpack for them quickly what this notion is about why there's global ecosystems that sharks live in.
Yeah, right. So the thing that was interesting about this, remember the basic ecology of the ocean is if you can bring back the apex predator, you bring back the whole system. There's 9 populations of white sharks around the world. No one had the capacity to manage any of them back. They didn't know where the birthing was, the nurseries. They didn't know where the mating was. They didn't understand their diet, their toxicology profile. And so they couldn't affect policy to manage them back. And so when I started to see this 9 population global white shark puzzle, I was like, okay, if we can solve one puzzle, we can solve all 9 of them.
Let's stop there. Market size, total size of the opportunity, TAM, if you will.
An impact opportunity.
Impact opportunity. But you can't eat an elephant all at once. You got to start somewhere. You started in the U.S. Talk to him about what happened.
Well, so we actually are in the U.S. now, and we'll go through that, but we didn't start in the U.S. I learned, again, you must chase evolving. No business is ever static. You're either growing or you're dying. When we first started Offshore Adventures, we thought, oh, wow, we can move around the world and just help the scientists in these various puzzles get access to the animal, and then they'll solve the puzzle with their country, and then they'll affect policy, and we'll do it that way. So I started in the Pacific from 2007 to 2009. We tagged 29 white sharks there, and then the scientists didn't publish. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe we went out and spent like $4 million getting this guy this data set and he didn't publish. So I'm like, oh, clearly I have to get involved in the science space, because if my guys are putting their body parts on the line, and there's a lot of money it costs to take these guys out, and they have no money, so we take the scientists out for free. We had to develop an economic model to support the ship so we could give it to the scientists. And I started to learn that the scientists weren't collaborating. This is not all of them, right? This is just the individuals. And we didn't get a quick publication we could leverage and then build on that publication with more. So I began to realize, wow, I have to build my own internal, at least a science manager, so that all these people we're helping and giving millions of dollars of ship time to are held accountable to publish in a reasonable period of time, or we get someone else to leverage that data set. So we went around the world before we got to the East Coast, and we tagged 40 in South Africa, and then we helped the people in Australia and Ecuador and Peru and Chile and Brazil, and we went all over, and then I ended up with all these half-done science projects that couldn't be leveraged. So when we came to the East Coast in 2015, I said to the scientists, how many total sharks do you need to solve this puzzle completely? The ship will not leave the region until you have the complete data set to publish, so it's leverageable. It must be leverageable for policy. And that's when we began here. In 2012, we tagged the first white sharks off the Cape Cod. They had just started showing up. I remember at that time, no one knew where they were going to go. And people were guessing, the middle of the Atlantic. We tagged the first 2 white sharks, one of which was a shark named Mary Lee, and she immediately proceeded to go to Jacksonville, Florida. And I remember when Mary Lee was a big female, like 4,000-pound, fully mature female. The whole east coast of the United States fell in love with her. She was sticking her nose in every estuary, river, and creek. And we knew when we started this on the East Coast, we not only needed to solve the science puzzle, we needed to change the tone of the conversation around sharks so that when we needed to bring them back, the general public would accept that. So we gave Mary Lee a Twitter handle. And Mary Lee began to give sharks for the first time their own voice. And Mary Lee has almost 200,000 Twitter followers. It kind of pisses me off because she smokes. I have like a fraction of that. And so, but anyway, it's a great story because people began engaging and suddenly they were falling in love with a 4,000. Mary Lee, don't leave, come back. And like, we think Mary Lee might be pregnant. Oh my God, Mary Lee's pregnant. Now we're talking about a 4,000-pound white shark, right? So it really shifted the tone of the conversation. And then she went straight to the Jacksonville beach and she pinged in right underneath the Jacksonville Beach pier. And yet at this particular time, our television show on National Geographic and History Channel had ended, and we were in the middle of a major cash crunch we thought was going to end OCEARCH. And I named that shark Mary Lee after my mom. I thought it was going to be the last shark I touched. The whole East Coast fell in love with us. Then she went under the Jacksonville Beach pier. This is when we had just started the tracker. And I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I got to call somebody and tell them there's like a 4,000-pound white shark under the pier. So I called the Jacksonville Beach Police Department. I'm like, this is the strangest phone call you've ever got in your life. I got a 4,000-pound white shark on the beach. I just felt like I had to tell somebody. And they went down and closed the beach because it was a popular surfing area. About 2 hours later, Mary Lee pinged in 3 miles offshore and they opened up the beach. And the entire press, the global press, ignited around this story. And it took OCEARCH from just about ready to die to it completely reinvigorated us. And then big companies like Caterpillar came in and began our fund to work to keep it going. And we had known how to make television from our previous work. So we decided to shift business models. One of the things you need to be aware of in your journey is when business models are shifting. Around this time, around 2010 or so, people were really trying to figure out what Google and Instagram and Facebook were doing. Like, how are these guys gonna make money? They give everything away. You know, and unbeknownst to our time, those people had seen, I'm gonna give my product away, create radical scale, and I'm gonna monetize the scale, not the product. That's what Google is. That's what Instagram and Facebook are. And so I was like, well, why can't we use the same business model in the ocean research space? So I decided at that time we were gonna after the TV shows, we were gonna open source everything, and we were gonna give it all away, and we were gonna try to create a radical community and monetize the community. So as we began to give all the data away, the tracker, we began to give all the content away, the global press erupted around our work. And we had known from our previous work that if we integrate brands into the content we give the press, we can go to those brands to fund our work. So we began to leverage the earned media space, the news space, as our content distributor because our sharks had become newsmakers. And every news outlet needs content every day, and they love the white shark story. It's clickbait. But we would only give them content that had the brands who supported our work into the content. And so suddenly all of our brands were finding themselves in the news about stories returning the ocean to abundance in the era of mobile first, in the now. And we had kind of successfully taken the Google model and for the first time applied it to ocean research and build a community and then focus on monetizing that community, not trying how to figure out how to someone to give you money for fuel.
How many of you
Big shift in the revenue model and in the business structure from making TV to open sourcing in the now with brand integrated content and driving press.
And just like any good startup, if it's not evolving, if it's not constantly trying to do something to meet the moment, meet the demand, the market, the customer base, it's going to die.
When you have to be aware, right? Because we were doing 100 million viewers a year on TV, and we thought it was over. We tagged this last couple sharks trying to help the East Coast. We didn't know what was gonna happen, but we felt like we could help the East Coast. And then lo and behold, Mary Lee in the fourth quarter of 2012 drove 1.25 billion earned media impressions. And we were used to 1 million impressions a year on TV. And I was like, oh, radical scale. There must be a path to monetize this scale. And we actually went to Caterpillar. Caterpillar funded our work for 3 years, and we integrated their brand into probably $400 million of earned media while they were supporting our work, making their brand, showing. We have 5 Caterpillar engines in the ship, so it was organic. And it was them doing something great for the future of the ocean with equipment that leveraged their machinery. And it saved us.
And it's not like that last evolution was all that you'll ever do with OCEARCH or what brought you to today, and now you're just set in perpetuity.
That time has passed. We're into a new model now.
Now you're continuing on a new model. If you're willing, break down for them what options you're looking at exploring now for new revenue streams.
So now for new revenues, in the beginning it was television. I started a TV production company, so we made the shows. I would take half the money we got to fund the ship, give the ship to the scientists, use the other half to make the show. That was the early years. It was pretty straight up simple television model, sponsorship model. Then we transitioned in when Google and Apple and all that stuff, Google and Facebook and Instagram, was all erupting. We totally pivoted to this complete open source exploration in the now. Everybody was in their phone, not in the TV set. So how do we get into their phone as quick as we can in real time so they can feel like they're on the ship with us? That went very well for a number of years up until COVID with big brand sponsorships, enjoying our scale, integrating content. We were part of their branding programs because conscious capitalism was really big at the time. People like to buy from brands that are doing good while they make business. And then COVID hit and the kind of influencer era hit. And the companies went from, $500,000 and $250,000 sponsorships to like, 10 or 15 grand with this influencer and that influencer. And the whole centralization of it got disseminated. It went to more of an influencer model. So those big corporate opportunities weren't there as much. But we had grown our community to a massive scale, and we had this incredible library of content, and we're always creating new content as we work. So we began to move more toward, now we have an app with a paywall where you can get premium content. We do big sweepstakes where people can enter and fundraise. We now have earned to get some city and state funding down in Florida. And so we began to cobble together a new revenue model, mostly based around monetizing our community that had been with us forever. We still give them all the free things we always have, but we give them an opportunity to get inside, behind the scenes, if they want to pay $3.99 a month. And, when you have 2 million people who are active downloads on your app and billions of impressions, you have an opportunity to maybe drive toward 20 or 30 or 40,000 subscribers a month, which completely shifts your revenue model. And then the funny thing is the bigger we get that, the more the corporate stuff wants to come back in to communicate with that audience.
Creating that FOMO.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And all of this is tied together again by this notion of having an exploration first mindset, observing what's around you, seeking out those curiosities you have, scratching at those.
Trying to connect the dots. I feel like so many of us walk through life unaware. Like, are you aware of what's going on around you? Do you ever walk in, like during COVID, you walk in and you see the grocery store is half full. Do you think about the dots? How does that trickle down through the system? How does that affect the next thing that affects the next thing? Being aware, exploring in all these different observations that you have. Because if you truly do that, you will begin to connect dots you might not otherwise. Like when Mary Lee drove the over 1 billion impressions in that fourth quarter of 12 after the TV shows had ended, they could have been like, oh, that's great. Or you could have been like, well, wait a minute, that's more scale than we had on a TV show. How do I connect this to develop value for brands so they're buying a part of our scale instead of a sponsorship on a TV show? And if you don't connect that dot, you just roll right past it and you miss the opportunity bus. The opportunity bus is important. In your life, the opportunity bus is going to come around just a few times. And it's going to stop in front of you and the door is going to open. And you can either choose to get on the opportunity bus or not. But when it closes its door and drives around the corner, it may never come back again. So you have to work on this tolerance for fear, this tolerance of uncertainty, because you will not make this journey or a journey like this if you are afraid. If you are looking for a reason to stop, there are 10,000 of those every day. But if you believe in yourself and what you're doing and you have a passion for it and you refuse to surrender and you got the grit to grind, believe it or not, you can make it through anything, even what seems impossible. Because if you can grind, you can grab another inch. And if you can grind more, you can grab another inch. And if you can do that over time, those inches turn into miles. And that's what my father always used to say. He used to say, man, like an inch is a cinch, a yard is hard. Just keep grinding and grab the inches. And over time, you end up doing all this stuff that everyone said was impossible, and you don't even really know how all you were doing was grabbing inches the whole way.
There's no way I'm going to let you go without seeing more shark videos because it's shark videos. But to that point, when you're putting all that together and you're putting inches together and you're getting to a point where it's either a foot or a yard to be metric friendly, you get to an element where at the end of all that journey, you get to a point that it all comes together to be something much more than what originally started. Sid, would you mind hitting the lights and turning it up?
When you handle an animal of this size, they'll hit you in a completely different way from an emotional standpoint. You feel this awness and respect for the animal, its ancientness, its wisdom, what it's done to provide for us all, a deep level of respect. This is what the body and the makeup of a fully mature female white shark looks like. Likely around a 50-year-old fish, well over 3,000 pounds. She's probably had 15 reproductive cycles, which means she's had maybe up to 100 babies. And some of those babies now are, old enough to be making babies, and they're sexually mature. So she would be, a proper and true matriarch of the ocean, a grandmother of sharks. For the scientists, it adds a whole new data set because we don't have a lot of samples from animals of that size. And so they can test the differences in what her blood chemistry looks like to a subadult white shark or even a smaller mature animal, and certainly juvenile animals. You can look at their organs through an ultrasound because everything is so big and clear. It's different than dealing with a smaller shark. You can see all these scars and blotches and colorations that are on her body. And that's really the story of her life, the story of what she's had to go through. We wanted to give her a name that reflected her ancientness and her awesomeness and her wisdom and what she will share with us and what she's doing for our future. Nagumi, her name means grandmother, from the local Mi'kmaq language here and the indigenous people of Nova Scotia. Every single one of those big ones like that, it moves you and you're changed. Every time you're changed.
Thanks for having me, everybody. Remember, when you're on your journey, I think the special sauce to put across the entire thing is to always remember and have this disposition that anything is possible if you do not care who gets the credit. Anything's possible if you do not care who gets the credit. Thanks for having me.